Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 on Friday, the 22nd of September. My name is Brian Liddy and I'm joined this evening, I'm pleased to say, by Professor John Robertson. Hello, John, how are you keeping?
I'm good, thank you.
Yes, I better let people know who you are, although I'm sure they're all very familiar. You're a lecturer and teacher for more than 20 years, and you're now retired professor from the University of the West of Scotland, and you founded the blog spot Talking Up Scotland 2 blog site, which I thoroughly recommend if you want to be informed on Scotland and how it's portrayed in the media. And thankfully, you're also a regular contributor here, for which we thank you very much. So, welcome.
My pleasure.
So I'll go on to then our routine, sadly, Ukraine update, day 576. Ukraine's Prime Minister, Denis Shmyhal, has said that Russia has restarted a campaign of aerial attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. During winter last year, Russian forces launched repeated attacks on Ukraine's energy grid that left millions without electricity, heating, and water for extended periods. Shmihal was speaking at an economic forum in Kyiv one day after Moscow's forces were reported to have fired more than 40 cruise missiles at Ukraine. One serviceman is missing after Ukraine carried out a missile strike on the main headquarters of Russia's Black Sea Fleet in Crimea. The Russian-installed governor of Sevastopol, Mikhail Razvoyayev, spoke to media outside the burning headquarters. Firefighters are reported to be battling the blaze, with more emergency forces being brought in. Alexander Prokudin, Ukraine's governor of Kherson, has said that one person has died as a result of Russian military action in the region this morning. Infrastructure Minister Alexander Kubrakov has said that three new cargo ships are heading towards Ukraine Black Sea ports for further food exports. The move comes as it was confirmed a second cargo vessel had loaded with grain and had departed from Ukraine's Kronmorsk seaport. Agriculture Ministry data published Friday shows that the Ukrainian grain exports fell sharply year on year. Last September, the UN and Turkey brokered Black Deal Sea Grain Initiative was in operation. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived in Canada, following on from his visits to the US Capitol, Pentagon and the White House. President Zelensky's visit to Washington was much tougher than the hero's welcome he was given 9 months ago, as some hardline Republicans are threatening to block President Biden's request for a fresh $24 billion aid package for Ukraine. In a closed-door briefing, Zelensky told senators that military aid was crucial to Ukraine's war effort. After the briefing, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer quoted President Zelensky as saying, "If we don't get the aid, we will lose the war." President Biden assured President Zelensky that strong US support for his war to repel Russian invaders would be maintained despite despite the Republican opposition, as a new US military aid package for Ukraine worth $325 million, including air defense systems and the second tranche of cluster munitions fired by a 155mm howitzer cannon was announced. My apologies. Russia is planning a huge defence spending hike in 2024, which will comprise 6% of gross domestic product in 2024, up from 3.9% in 23 and 2.7% in 2021. Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó is meeting his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly today. Hungary has been a critic of the EU's Russia sanctions, but has also so far supported all the agreed measures. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has said another €1.5 billion has been disbursed to Ukraine. Poland's president has said a dispute with Ukraine over grain imports will not significantly impact positive diplomatic relations. So, John, that was quite a lengthy update today. So there's still a lot going on, but was there anything there that maybe caught your eye?
Not so much in there as it's something I did notice earlier today was that the Polish government have kind of fallen out with Ukraine. Are saying that they won't provide any more armaments to Ukraine. I wonder if that's one of the early signs. There may be others. One of the early signs that support for Ukraine is beginning, as it must inevitably, beginning to diminish, such that we get towards a position where, because neither side will accept complete defeat here, it's quite clear, the Russians will not give up if that means complete defeat and shame and embarrassment for them. They'll have to get something out of it. So there will be a deal, and whether that leads to something we've seen so often before, globally, some kind of UN supervised demilitarized zone in the area to the east of Ukraine, where much of the population is actually Russian speaking and kind of pro-Russian, I think, to be fair. Obviously, I'm not up to date and don't have detail on that, but given the history we've seen of these kinds of conflicts, I would have thought that at some point in the fairly near future, we see some kind of UN-sponsored deal here, because it can't go on as it is. Neither side can afford that.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I think you're probably right. I think once they put their weapons down, it's not going to be an easy task to come to some kind of agreement. But I'll move on to our next item. The UK economy is at growing risk of recession, with industry figures showing the sharpest monthly fall in private sector activity outside of the COVID pandemic since the financial crisis. In a sign that higher interest rates and the cost of living crisis are combining to depress consumer demand, the latest snapshot from S&P Global and the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, otherwise known as CIPS, showed a steep drop in the UK's dominant service sector and manufacturing output in September. Aside from pandemic disruptions to the economy, the latest decrease in the Purchasing Managers' Index, the PMI, was the steepest since March 2009. Yesterday, the Bank of England halted its most aggressive round of interest rate increases in decades amid growing concerns over the weakness of the economy, holding borrowing costs at 5.25% after 14 previous rises. It said it was given early sight of the S&P Global CIPS data before its decision. On Friday, Mike Bell of the US investment firm JP Morgan Asset Management said, "This morning's weak UK PMI business survey explains why the bank didn't raise rates yesterday. It's clear from the weak survey data that the effect of the prior interest rate hikes is starting to bite." The weakness in the key service sector, along with the ongoing weakness in manufacturing, was probably what sealed the deal for the bank. Total new work in the private sector fell for the third month in a row, with firms warning that the cost of living pressures and higher borrowing costs, alongside cutbacks in the real estate and construction sectors, were weighing on activity. The S&P Global CIPS UK PMI Composite Output Index fell from 48.6 in August to 46.8 in September. A reading above 50 separates growth from contraction. I'll just say that sentence again. A reading above 50 separates growth from contraction. Chris Williamson, the chief business economist at S&P Global Market Intelligence, said the reading was consistent with the economy shrinking at a quarterly rate of about 0.4%. 2 consecutive quarters of decline are regarded as the technical definition of a recession. So, John, I think we've said before on this show that neither of us are economists. And recently we've seen the likes of Wilco's recent demise. The government's faced with a declining economy, and there's no sign of that changing anytime soon. They're pursuing lower inflation, understandably, I suppose, but it seems the route to lower inflation is leading to recession. Was this inevitable, do you think?
Well, I as you said already, neither of us is an economist. And just as I'm not a believer in religious theories, thank God, I'm also not a believer in many kind of economic theories, or any of them, thank God again. So I wouldn't want to say anything definitive about what's going to happen next, because I think no one knows what's going to happen next with the kind of chaos that persists in global capitalism at the moment. I suppose it was inevitable, if we're going to try and find some kind of sense in this, it was inevitable, I suppose, that the interest rate hikes would have their effect, and they have clearly, I think, suppress the hospitality sector in particular, which is of course the major sector being discussed here. But of course, in the background, there's somebody in the background going Brexit, 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 because it's still that the hospitality sector is seriously damaged by lack of labour.
Is it just Brexit, do you think, or is there also a bit of the Liz Truss
Oh,
trashing the economy in there as well?
yes, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm sure. Sure that must have given it quite a kind of shock. But again, I think were we back in the EU fully, I think we might, as most of Europe has, we might start to recover.
Okay, well, we'll be talking about the EU a wee bit later on, so we can maybe unpack that a wee bit later. Thank you, John. Lib Dem leader Ed Davey plans to use the Lib Dem conference in Bournemouth, which starts on Saturday, to set out his new policy ideas. The pre-manifesto includes a plan to copy the Scottish system of free personal care, which he hopes will allow people to return home quickly from hospital, freeing up beds and help with the English NHS patient waiting time crisis. The Lib Dems have dropped any reference to Brexit as they hope to target blue wall Tory seats in relatively affluent areas. Following Ed Davey and the Lib Dems' apparent ditching of support for rejoining the EU, saying it was off the table, Alan Smith MP described Davey, Starmer and Sunak as the three bungling Brexiteers of UK politics, and warned Scottish voters can clearly see the damage Brexit and Westminster are causing to Scotland's economy as they face the soaring UK cost of living. Yesterday, the Labour Party also made clear its support for Brexit, with a spokesperson confirming, "We've left the European Union and we're not going back in any form. We don't support dynamic alignment, we're not joining the single market or the customs union." The Lib Dems Brexit conversion comes ahead of an SNP pro-EU roadshow event in Dundee tonight, where Stephen Flynn MP and Alan Smith MP are discussing the huge economic benefits of Scotland regaining its EU membership as an independent country. Commenting, SNP Europe and EU accession spokesperson Alan Smith MP said, "The SNP will fight the next election as the only major party committed to rejoining the EU and the only party with a plan to escape Brexit and regain Scotland's place in Europe." He went on to say, "With Starmer, Sunak and Davey, the three bungling Brexiteers of UK politics, all throwing in the towel and ruling out any return to Europe, it's clear independence is Scotland's only route back to EU prosperity and only escape from the long-term damage of Brexit. Scottish voters will not forgive the Brexit parties for the huge damage they are causing to Scotland's economy. Neither the Labour Party nor the Lib Dems can credibly claim to offer a better future when they are both wedded to Brexit, which has cost Scotland's economy billions, sent the cost of living soaring, and set the UK on the path to long-term decline. At the next election, voting SNP is the only way to secure independence and escape Brexit, so Scotland can build a strong and prosperous economy at the heart of Europe." Excuse me, John. So Brexit's a Tory gift that they won't take back, even though they knew that we wouldn't like it when they bought it in the first place. Labour say they won't rejoin the EU anymore, not in any form, as they said. Today I've seen posts on social media saying things like, only the Greens are now the only party committed to rejoining the EU. Does this kind of political myopia bother you?
Well, it does a bit, but it's become so familiar. You have to kind of get used to it, I suppose. They just can't. I mean, the mainstream media south of the border just can't get used to the idea that the SNP is the third party there. I find it quite remarkable that they have this failure of nerve. I would have thought. I mean, some leading Lib Dems just last week were saying, before Ed Davey presumably pronounced and before the Scottish Lib Dems decided to join him, that the Lib Dems would lead the UK back into the EU. They were still on that last week. I don't have access, obviously, to the polling data that presumably has nudged them into this fearful reaction where they've decided that they can't win these Tory seats, these incredibly fragile Tory seats, where the Lib Dems have won in the past by embracing return to the EU. The support from the polls that I've seen suggests that support for the EU is way up now, 60+%. And across the board, I mean, I think Conservatives, Labour, and so on, I would have thought, I would have, and so I'm not, I'm not the Lib Dem leader, thank God again. Um, I would have thought this was the time to jump. The Lib Dems, if they had any brains, to my mind, any guts, they would think this is the chance. They could wipe the floor with the Tories in the South. I would have thought. They may still do so, wipe the floor. I mean, anybody could wipe the floor with the Tories at the moment, but they may actually have missed an opportunity to do even more thoroughly had they had the courage to say, right, we'll take you back in.
Thank you, John. And you're right about the polls. I've got one here that said that 62% of people in the UK want to rejoin the EU versus 38%. That was excluding don't knows, and that was a report.
Mm.
What do you think then of the fact that it seems now, looking at the recent upsets in by-elections at places like Uxbridge, where, as you say, the Lib Dems did quite well and Labour against the Tories, are the Lib Dems and Labour in England chasing the same Tory votes?
I think they are. I think that the Lib Dems are particularly well. They're both probably. I think the Labour Party can be criticised on moral grounds in their
Mm.
chase for Tory votes because they're chasing some of the least appealing people in the country. Quite frankly, people that want the empire back, and they're prepared to consider that. To suppress the heaving in their stomachs at that particular desire. But the Lib Dems are trying to chase, I would have thought, some of the more educated, some of the more centrist, and some of the more pro-Europe amongst the Tory vote. And so they should have the courage, I think, to go for that. Uxbridge, I think, was a bit freakish. It looks as if Uxbridge was a lot to do with the local constituency there. I think I've read this somewhere, and that the emission charges issue was raised. But I think what I've read about Uxbridge was that it was more to do with the fact that the Conservatives, for once, had the gumption not to helicopter in a candidate to replace Boris Johnson, but they let the local party choose somebody who was well known locally and active, and he managed to hang on.
Yeah, but if they're all chasing the same Tory votes, I suppose it kind of explains why
Yeah,
they're all
yeah,
starting to come out with the same policies and
yeah,
leaving the
yeah.
SNP as the third biggest party, but the only one that
Mm.
supports rejoining the EU. But I'd best move on. Poverty groups and experts have highlighted the vital impact that the Scottish Child Payment is having on tackling poverty. Introduced by the Scottish Government as part of Scotland's new social security system, the game-changing child benefit payment provides families with £25 a week per eligible child. Recent figures have shown that over 300,000 children in Scotland are in receipt of the payment. The Scottish Parliament's Social Justice and Social Security Committee heard from experts in child poverty. Chris Burt, the Associate Director for Scotland at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, said, "The Scottish Child Payment is working. It is significantly reducing child poverty. Some people will give you various different numbers, but it is probably 4 or 5% at the moment. It will significantly reduce child poverty. That is a really good thing." Bill Scott, chair of the Poverty and Inequality Commission, said, "The Scottish Child Payment has made a significant difference, will continue to make a significant difference." The committee evidence follows recent comments on the Scottish Child Payment by Professor Danny Dorling of Oxford University, who considered that the Scottish Child Payment may have caused the largest fall in child poverty anywhere in Europe since the fall of the Berlin Wall. 2 out of every 7 children in Scotland, their families will get it, and that has an effect on changing the inequality level in Scotland, which I don't see in any country for which there has been data for the last 40 years, Dorling said. Senior civil servant Liz Ditchburn also recently wrote for the David Hume Institute to ask, why aren't more people talking about the Scottish Child Payment? She said, "I've lost track of the number of times I've mentioned the Scottish Child Payment to colleagues and friends based elsewhere in the UK, even some involved in public policy work, and I've been told they've never heard of it. The next reaction when I describe the level and scale of this initiative is, wow, that's big, it is indeed." Commenting, SNP MSP Colette Stevenson said, "The Scottish Child Payment is one of the most important policies introduced since the establishment of the Scottish Parliament, and it is encouraging to learn from experts about the positive impact it is having on directly tackling child poverty. I am delighted to see the SNP's game-changing payment benefiting so many children across Scotland at a time when Westminster control is causing significant hardship." She went on to say, while the SNP government is boosting incomes to help tackle poverty with unique and progressive policies like the Scottish Child Payment, Westminster is making people poorer with cuts and economic mismanagement. So, John, I think I'd really just like to ask you the same question that featured in the report there. Everyone seems to know about the problem Scotland has, sadly, with drug deaths, but why aren't more people talking about the Scottish Child Payment?
Well, as you've correctly pointed out, that's perhaps the sharpest contrast and the most revealing piece of evidence of the rather dark and deep bias in Scotland's media against the people of Scotland and against obviously the Scottish government and the leading party in that, the SNP. I've followed Professor Danny Darling. He's a professor of human geography at Oxford. I've followed his work for some time. He's a very, very interesting guy, and he's a very the word good guy. He's a very decent sort of person, who's really committed to trying to find academic solutions to problems that will improve the lives of millions. So his work is very influential, I think, and he has been, of course, unlike many south of the border, he's looked north at what's been happening in NHS Scotland too, but also in particular what's happened with developments like this. The child payment is one of these events, I think, which, when you're in the midst of an historical phase, as we always say, you don't always know how big it is or how meaningful it might be. But I think when historians look back and, in 10, 20 years and longer, they will see this as a hugely significant event. And, famous last words, I said I wouldn't predict the future, but if we don't see a massive statistical result in terms of the reduction in child poverty in Scotland, then I'll be very surprised. Child poverty is already lower in Scotland, but it's still far too high. But it's also already significantly lower. That's to do with benefits like this. It's to do with obviously the bedroom tax, which has been compensated for. It's to do with the increased supply of low rent, affordable housing. But I've got famous last words, tempting fate. I've got a feeling in a very short time we're going to see statistics which, if only BBC Scotland would cover them, will present Scotland and the effectiveness of its government in a very good light. And, and by that time, of course, the drug deaths will have dipped so low, as they're already in a downward trend. The drug deaths will have dipped to a point where they're struggling to find anything to say about them.
Thank you, John. So when you were talking there, I was reminded of that word mitigation, which I'm often have to use in this report. But it's good to know that this isn't mitigation, and this is actually something that's benefiting people directly. But I'll move on.
Yeah.
Responding to the growing backlash against Rishi Sunak's decision to undermine net zero investment in the UK, the SNP has said that independence is key to capitalising on the green energy and reducing household bills in Scotland. SNP Energy spokesperson Dave Duggan MP has called the UK government anti-business and anti-growth, and he warned that they are actively damaging Scotland's economy by threatening the vital green investment the country needs. Mr Duggan confirmed that SNP MPs will use every available opportunity to vote against the net zero U-turn, including opposing statutory instruments to delay the ban on new petrol and diesel cars from 2030 to 2035. The SNP announcement comes as leading manufacturers warned the move created a climate of uncertainty for business investment in the UK, with Ford UK Chair Lisa Brankin warning, "Our business needs three things from the UK government: ambition, commitment and consistency. A relaxation of 2030 would undermine all three." Commenting, SNP Energy and Net Zero spokesperson Dave Duggan MP said, "Rishi Sunak's reckless U-turn shows the Tory government is anti-business, anti-growth and actively damaging Scotland's economy by threatening the vital green investment we need. Scotland is energy rich and has potential to be a 21st century powerhouse of green and renewable technology. But the Westminster Government is undermining progress by withholding funding and deterring investors with damaging decisions. We've seen it with their decades-long failure to invest in renewables, the 20-year delay to carbon capture funding, the failure to secure any bids for offshore wind projects, and now we see it with the huge uncertainty caused by Westminster ripping up its net zero commitments. He went on to say, it's clear independence is key to capitalising on green energy gold rush, reducing household bills and securing sustained economic growth for Scotland. The SNP will use every opportunity to vote against these Tory plans, but only independence can deliver the green energy investment and strong economy that Scotland needs. So, John, I've got two questions in front of me. I'm just going to have to pick one, I suppose. Do you think, will the Scottish Government have to amend its targets and put them back as to when they expect to reach net zero? So from 2030 to, say, 2035 as a result of what's happening down in Westminster?
Well, you can certainly see the pressure might be on to do that. I'm not. I have no idea if they will or if they will not. I mean, they have in the past when there have been other pressures. The Scottish Government has said that they're sticking to the targets. This highlights, to my mind, something quite important about the Conservative Party. They always prided themselves that they were pragmatic rather than ideological. But the pragmatism here has gone way beyond anything that you and I might recognise as pragmatism to deep, dark cynicism, that they will do anything in a desperate attempt to claw back their position. They've suffered some kind of mental collapse recently in terms of their likely support for the next election. But as we watch on the news night after night now, much of the world burn or be inundated in floods. That Sunak's desire to go full throttle on, I can't remember what the phrase he used was, but to go full steam ahead, let's say, on North Sea exploitation, is shocking, absolutely shocking that he should do that. The Scottish Government, of course, has limited power here. We can't in Scotland decide whether or not an oil field should be denied or allowed to further exploit the resources available there. So I don't know what the Scottish Government will do, but it just reveals how cynical this dominant element in the current Conservative Party is.
And John, do you think, was there a wee hint in there when you listened to what the SNP MPs were saying in Westminster that they were going to kind of try and hamper this U-turn for net zero? Do you think they're going to, what kind of activity, what can they do you think, that would maybe have that effect? Are they going to be disruptive, do you think?
Again, I will say I don't know the answer to that. I tend to think not, in terms of what you mean in terms of closed down debate and so on. It's not impossible, but I tend to think not. I think that, inevitably, I think they will raise motions to try and turn this around, and they will get some support from elements from the Corbynist element in the Labour Party, and maybe some Lib Dems here and there. I don't know, but much of the Labour Party, fearful of its future with this current leadership, will sit on its hands. So anything the Conservatives wish to do here, in terms of giving up in this maybe short to medium term, giving up on the targets, I think it will walk through, almost unopposed by Labour.
Mm. Yep. So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on it, I'm sure. So the next item. The Brexit trade deal should not be reopened just to satisfy demands from some sectors of the UK and EU motor industry concerned about looming tariffs on electric cars, Thierry Breton, the influential European Commissioner, has said. EU leaders have come under pressure to suspend 10% tariffs on electric car exports that are expected to begin in January under the Brexit trade agreement sealed by Lord Frost in 2020. Mr Breton, who is responsible for the EU internal market, was reported to have said the Commission and EU leaders are bound under competition laws to look at the entire automotive ecosystem and not favour one category in the industry over the other. He believes the Brexit trade deal should not be unpicked. Earlier this year, Stellantis, the parent company for 14 brands, including Vauxhall and Jeep, issued a stark warning that it may have to close operations in the UK with the loss of thousands of jobs if the tariffs were not temporarily lifted. Their call has been backed by the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, or ACEA, which has said exports of electric cars to the UK, worth tens of billions of euros a year, will be put at risk unless the Brexit trade deal is altered. Recent support from Germany has fueled anticipation of a favourable decision by the Commission, but Breton warned that the car industry was not made up of big brands like BMW, Volkswagen or Vauxhall alone, and he had to ensure a level playing field for all. Breton is responsible for driving through legislation to try to boost Europe's ability to produce its own electric car batteries. Production on the continent is trailing China, and European leaders are concerned that a sector which has until now held its own is facing a serious challenge from cheaper Chinese imports. Under the Brexit deal, a 10% tariff will apply to any EU cars exported to the UK or UK cars exported to the EU that are not 45% homemade. Something they say is impossible, while China has a stranglehold on chemical supplies. Last week, Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, announced there would be an EU investigation into state subsidy of Chinese cars. So, John, I've got a wee scenario here for you. So, say Scotland had voted for independence in 2014, and let's say Scotland then joined the EU soon after that, and then England voted to leave the EU. How would Scotland feel, or how would we feel, if the EU then turned round and gave England loads of concessions, even though it was no longer a member? Because Brexit, I mean, it was self-inflicted, wasn't it? It's not the EU's problem to sort.
Well, I agree entirely. I don't think there's much evidence that the EU will actually give, would have given an independent England many concessions. I think there's a great deal of resentment right across Europe against Britain as they see it, but against the regime we've had for this last 10, 13 years. So as has been suggested already, I don't think they will get much in the way of subsidies. I think it's very important with particular regard to cars, of course. I mean, Scotland, of course, doesn't have any car production, but there's a very significant proportion. I don't know what percentage it is, but a very significant part of the population does not use a car, and they're dependent on walking and cycling and public transport to get around, or they work from home and don't need to travel at all. And I think there's a tendency here to, as we see with ferry subsidies, I think a tendency to subsidise a fairly kind of comfortable part of the population who are doing it kind of okay compared to others living in inner cities and dependent on public transport, or who don't take their cars about in ferries and so on. And I think we need to see a bit of a rebalancing here. I think England might have seen that under Corbyn, a bit of a rebalancing, towards more efficient, more what would the word be? I was going to say more pervasive, but that's not quite the right word. But a greater presence for good quality public transport and for alternative methods of working and of studying. I think I've been a bit saddened actually by the rush back to university by huge numbers of students. I had a long time in education, and I know a bit about educational technologies, but open learning, and there's no need. There's absolutely no need. Much of this return to the workplace, including in education, but also in the office, is ritualistic. It's about making teachers and managers feel they have a meaningful role in life, rather than improving the productivity or the efficiency of what they do.
Thank you, John, and I think you're absolutely right about not everybody drives. I've never learned to drive, but I'm willing to concede it's easy for me because I'm an urbanite. I've always lived in cities and used public transport and the like. But the next item is the BBC is investigating a claim that Russell Brand exposed himself to a woman before laughing about it on his radio show. The incident is alleged to have happened in 2008 when the woman was working in the same building as the BBC's office in Los Angeles. Shortly after the incident, the comedian was heard laughing as his co-presenter, Matt Morgan, said Brand showed his willy to a lady. The woman was reported to have been stunned and disgusted by the encounter. In a statement, a BBC spokesperson said, "We're very sorry to hear of these allegations and we will look into them. We are conducting a review to look at allegations of this nature, and if the woman who has shared her story is willing to speak to us, we would be very keen to hear from her and anyone else who may have information." A key part of the review is to understand what complaints were made at the time, if there was knowledge of Russell Brand's conduct while he worked on BBC Radio, and what was done as a result. We will, of course, speak to the Bureau team and anyone who was working there in 2008 as part of this. Further, the Director General has been very clear that some broadcasts from that period were and are inexcusable and totally unacceptable and would never be aired today. Brand did not respond to a request for comment by journalists. He has been accused of rape, assault and emotional abuse between 2006 and 2013, when he was at the height of his fame and working for the BBC and Channel 4 and starring in Hollywood films. After a joint investigation by The Times, The Sunday Times and Channel 4's dispatches. Brand denies the allegations. Channel 4 has announced an investigation into the presenter's time at its channels. It also said it has removed all the content featuring Brand, while the BBC said it has reviewed content and made a considered decision to remove some of it, having assessed that it now falls below public expectations. John, I'm sure, like me, you're troubled by this story. This chap, Russell Brand, apparently he's 6'3". He's a big fella with an incredibly intense look about him. So I can easily imagine how he might be very intimidating to women. And this is all after the Me Too movement, of course. YouTube have demonetized him, and I'm just thinking, do you think, is that fair? As everything at the moment is just alleged, we don't really know for a fact if he did these things or what the other side of the story might be. And again, I'm reminded of the roller coaster that Johnny Depp went through recently and how it looked really bad for him at one stage, and then he was vindicated. I don't know, that's not really a question, but what do you think? Have you any thoughts?
Well, this is a particular topic that I've only really become aware of with the recent documentary about Russell Brand. I've been aware of him a long time and was never really much entertained by his style. I didn't kind of get it at all. I was quite shocked in the documentary to see that quite a long time ago, his stand-up featured a supposed line of humour, which I can't repeat, of course, and I won't repeat, but which culminates in the idea that he took pleasure, sexual pleasure, in seeing a woman cry. And that was presented supposedly as a joke, but he made a lot of it and he seemed to enjoy it quite a bit. And that was quite a shock to me. So I hadn't realised. So there were all these quite early warning signs, maybe 20 years ago or 15, 20 years ago. I have no idea. I haven't paid any attention at all to the subsequent debate. You're certainly correct that there's not the kind of evidence that you would expect in a court of law to have him committed for a crime here, but there's an awful lot of smoke here.
Thank you, John. Yes, and I know the stand-up routine you're talking about, it refers to mascara, and it's maybe quite telling that one of the women that's given evidence against him, she talked about something similar.
Yeah, same thing, yeah.
Yeah, so the next item. The Paris prosecutor's office has recommended that the far-right leader Marine Le Pen and 23 members of her National Rally party stand trial over the alleged misuse of EU funds. The request, which will be considered by judges, comes after a 7-year investigation into allegations that the party, then called the Front National, had used money destined for EU parliamentary assistance to pay staff who were instead working for the party between 2004 and 2016. MEPs are allocated funds to cover expenses, including their assistants, but are not meant to use them for party expenses. The case involves 11 MEPs, including Le Pen and her 95-year-old father, the former party leader Jean-Marie Le Pen, as well as 13 parliamentary assistants. Le Pen is a member of the French Parliament, where her far-right party is the biggest single opposition party. She is preparing to run for president for the 4th time in 2027, when Emmanuel Macron will not be eligible to run again. Le Pen has previously denied wrongdoing. At trial, Le Pen could face a potential 10-year jail sentence, a €1 million fine, and, because she is an elected official, ineligibility to hold public office for 10 years, the prosecutor's office said. John, if Le Pen does end up going to trial for this misuse of funds, do you think she might be tempted to move to England and stand for Parliament as an MP because she's less chance of being prosecuted? I'm also thinking she might get on very well with Michel Mon. But seriously, I've got two French friends. I've got French friends, and Macron can't stand again, as the item said. He's had both his two shots, which is the most you can get. My French friends are genuinely scared because they think that Le Pen still stands a chance of winning the next presidential election. Would it be like Trump in America, where it doesn't matter how many indictments he's got against him, people are still going to just vote for him?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for the situation in France because I don't have any French friends I'm aware of. Well, I may have some via social media. My apologies to them, but I'm not aware of French friends at the moment. So, it's not something I take a huge amount of interest specifically what's happening in France. But there's an important point in there which you make and which the story makes, and that's where a politician represents a constituency of some kind, a geographical constituency, in which there live those who voted for him or her and those who didn't vote for them. And where there are funds to enable that politician to represent all of those living in his constituency, those funds should be clearly, visibly distinct from any funds he or she raises or gets from the party to be used in pursuance of of electoral success. That's very important. I mean, I understand that happens here, and you're right that in England, of course, there have been some fairly clear examples recently of transgression there, where money that was designed to actually be used on behalf of all of the constituents was used by the Conservative Party, pretty much. There may have been incidents in Scotland of a greater or lesser extent, I don't know, but it's a very important distinction. I may be surprising for me to say this now, given that I've just said I don't really know a great deal about what's happening in France in terms of the strength of the parties, but I don't think there's a trend of a particularly strong nature towards right-wing populists at the moment in Northern Europe. I think we saw that a few years back, but I think it's probably a bit weakened. And so I would have thought that one of the dominant parties, the Gaullists or the Socialists, whatever, will see off Marine Le Pen fairly safely.
Thank you, John. And I suppose the fact that she's already tried 4 times and failed, but is willing to try for a 5th time, shows that she's tenacious, at least, I suppose. So I'll move on to the next item. The Scottish Government has extended the Croft House grant with a fresh round of support worth £250,000, which will help to maintain and improve the standard of housing on crofts. It will fund major repairs, internal improvements, rebuilding and energy efficiency improvements. The fund is designed to support the full potential of a croft to be realised and help to retain people in rural life and island communities. There are around 21,400 crofts in Scotland, and since the grant's inception in 2007, the scheme has awarded more than £24.6 million to 1,110 households in rural and island communities. The funding has been welcomed as fantastic news for rural and island communities. The SNP have warned that the UK government poses a threat to the future of crofting, no doubt through their lack of commitment to post-Brexit funding and the Subsidy Control Act. Commenting, SNP MSP Alistair Allen said, Scotland's crofters are a vital part of many Highland and Island communities. I'm pleased to see the SNP Scottish Government extending support to those whose work is crucial to stewarding the landscape and the local economy in places like the Western Isles. The Croft House grant has been an invaluable resource and has gone a long way to securing the sustainability of what are often fragile areas. This year, £440,000 worth of grants have been awarded to 15 crofters. Crofting is an essential part of both the cultural heritage and the socio-economic future of rural and island communities, and I'm glad to see this grant made more widely available and would would encourage all those who are eligible to apply for support. So, John, it's as well as financial support, this is like welcome support for a way of life that is central to Scottish culture. And I don't know if, like me, you're surprised to. I was surprised to hear there were so many crofts, or as many as that, in Scotland.
Yes, I was
Sorry.
surprised by the number. Sure, it was that more than 20,000. If anybody had asked me to guess how many crofts there were in Scotland, I guess less than 10,000. So it's clearly twice as big a thing. I think, as you rightly point out, it's a major cultural distinction between that part of Scotland in particular and significant and major parts of England, where farming is a very different beast, if you pardon the metaphor there. Large scale, affluent, and and based often on cultivation of crops and so on. And you compare that with the kind of thing that happens in much of Scotland, with its very different kinds of ground and soil qualities, and the presence of rock and so on. They're chalk and cheese, and clearly there needs to be support. And I think UK governments inevitably don't understand that, don't understand that there's something happening up here that's just of a different order altogether, and it's at least as valuable, perhaps more valuable, because of its presence in communities. So it did strike me as very good news, and I'm always pleased to see that kind of thing happen.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's going to go some way to help in terms of climate change and environmental issues too. But
Mhm.
the Scottish Government's often criticised for being too focused on the Central Belt. Do you think this will go some way to changing that perception?
Well, I mean, it'd be very difficult for the Scottish government not to be focused on the central belt. When I don't know what is it more than 80% of the population living in that kind of belt between Edinburgh and Glasgow. I mean, obviously they have to serve these people. I sometimes find it quite annoying when you hear people from sometimes living in very pleasant environments, in Scotland's islands, and with heavily subsidised ferries and various other kinds of enticement to live there, who for some reason think they should have so much more than they already get, and they need, frankly, they need a wee visit to some of the inner city housing schemes to see the people who are subsidising their slightly better lifestyles. I don't think the Scottish government really requires any particular shake-up in terms of its uh, its management of the Scottish economy more broadly. I think they're clearly, they're doing their best to help these communities, but by doing so, they're subsidising a way of life at the expense of other ways of life, and we need the broad picture sometimes.
Thank you, John. I'll move on to the next item. Over £3 million has been distributed to nature projects across Scotland to help them scale up their conservation work and ensure the benefits are shared with local communities. The Facility for Investment Ready Nature in Scotland, or FIRNS, is co-funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund in partnership with the Scottish Government and Nature Scot. It aims to create a pipeline of market-ready projects to help attract responsible private investment in Scotland's nature. 27 diverse projects will share over £3.6 million this year. That's approximately £1.8 million from public funds and another £1.8 million matched by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. The funded projects are spread across Scotland, from the Solway Firth to Shetland, Fife, across the central Scotland and the Hebrides. Examples include using private finance to restore river catchments, to improve water quality and reduce flood risk, while creating community assets such as growing spaces and improved green space. Environment Minister Gillian Martin visited the Water of Leith catchment in Inverleith Park, one of the projects to benefit from the new funding. She said the Scottish Government is already investing in nature at scale, with £65 million in the Nature Restoration Fund and £250 million peatland restoration alone. As set out in our new programme for government, we are committed to taking forward our distinctive market vision in Scotland. That is a market for responsible investment that contributes to a just transition by benefiting the environment and supporting communities. The Facility for Investment Ready Nature in Scotland will support a diverse range of projects, from those seeking to restore coastal salt marshes to iconic Atlantic rainforests, peatlands, rivers, lochs, farmland biodiversity, and green spaces for nature and people. So, John, there's a couple of things in there. I mean, one is the mention of rainforests in Scotland. I don't think many people realise that Scotland does have a rainforest
Mm.
on the west coast. It's not very big, but it is there. And I'm kind of intrigued by what sounds like a kind of a pret-a-porter or off-the-shelf approach, where there's a pipeline of market-ready projects to be lined up for developers to take on and invest. Have you ever heard of anything like that elsewhere or anywhere before?
No, no, I haven't. I mean, there is something slightly unnerving about that particular metaphor, isn't there? The pipeline. It kind of implies that there's a wee group of experts there somewhere deep in Holyrood who will be coming up with all the ideas, and they may be people who are more used to a university staff room than to actually being out in the field. So, but perhaps we're being unfair. I mean, I think one of the things I think that's unspoken in that particular report is these all sound like good ideas to be applauded. It doesn't sound like they're on a huge scale, but I would have thought and this is one of the areas that I would be critical of the achievements of the SNP and government. One of the aspects of all of this that is unaddressed and I think really needs to be addressed if projects of this kind are to really take off, and that's land reform. Scotland still is in the hands of a tiny elite of landowners, many of them not people who even live here, people who choose to live somewhere else. You're allowed to do that. You can own Scotland and live somewhere else. Try doing that in Denmark or Norway, and you'll find out what an appropriate system is. Where if you're going to own a bit of land, you have to live somewhere on it or near it. I would have thought all of these plans to diversify, to reintroduce nature, to rewild and so on, all very commendable things. I think they depend on breaking up the ownership so that we don't have the landscape largely grouse shooting, which is what it is at the moment.
Thank you, John. I know what you mean about that metaphor about the pipeline. Do you think maybe they should have used something like a sausage factory instead? But then, no, maybe not. I don't know.
No.
I think I'm right in saying that this was announced in Edinburgh by Lorna Slater, so I'm guessing that it's probably a green SNP, but
Mm.
mostly green policy. Oh, it's Gillian Martin, sorry. Gillian Martin, I must have been looking at something else. The voice in my ear tells me that launched it. Do you think critics will say that this is another example of the green tail wagging the SNP dog?
It's not something that concerns me really. I'm broadly and almost entirely in favour of it's not the coalition is not quite the right word, but the relationship between the SNP and the Greens. On the one hand, it's entirely essential to maintain control. So there's maybe it doesn't matter to some extent if you don't agree with everything the Greens do, or if you're a Green and you don't agree with everything the SNP do. The alternative is so much worse. The alternative is not to have a pro-independence government with the Greens and the SNP doing so. I don't see an awful lot of sign of the Greens wagging the tail. There's a fairly significant element I would have thought of the SNP support would agree with many of the environmental aspirations that the Greens have. There may be issues over, I don't know, gender recognition or whatever, but broadly speaking, I think this is something that's on the one hand entirely essential, and on the other pretty positive.
Yeah, the First Minister, he certainly said, I think more than once, that he thinks the coalition between the SNP and the Greens is worth its weight, worth its weight in gold. And certainly when you look at the numbers in Holyrood, when it means that the SNP and the Greens together have got a majority, and that means that the budget gets passed a lot more quickly and easily, and they've probably got a majority when it comes to votes. But maybe like to go into something you mentioned, land reform, and I think you're right, it is really important. But do you think the reason that more land reform hasn't happened yet is because the SNP are a bit too timid, or they're a bit scared about the vet? You mentioned grouse shooting estates. Are they too worried about taking them on before we're an independent country?
It may be. I mean, I'm not. Although an SNP member, obviously I'm not party to the debates that go in the inner circles there. I'm puzzled. I would have thought land reform was a vote winner. I mean, how many people care that much about the owners of these vast estates that you might think that... I mean, I appreciate that were the SNP and the Greens to take them head on and to try and introduce the kind of radical reform that we should have here, so that, for example, people can only own a certain amount and they can only own anything at all if they actually live in the country, like as is the case elsewhere. Then, I mean, obviously the media response would be pretty negative, but I'm not sure that the electorate would be much moved by that. You know, the media response matters, but hardly anybody's reading newspapers, and a diminishing number are even watching BBC Scotland news. So that, you know, I think it does seem a little fearful. And I'm puzzled. I'm puzzled by the lack of progress on this.
And do you sticking on land reform, it does seem that these huge estates make it difficult for community buyouts. Do you think if there was land reform, then it would make community buyouts easier?
You would think so. That would seem like an obvious consequence of that, and that would enable people to try out some of these, whether the ideas come out of the pipeline or the sausage production factory, or whether they come from somewhere else. Then, you know, that if you've got a fragmentation of the ownership of land, then I think, you know, I've got a terrible kind of analogy or metaphor in my head of broken up soil here. You know, you can plant seeds in that, but if you've just got a big solid block of clay, as we have just now, with grouse wandering and scratching about all over it, then it's going to be difficult to get new ideas off the ground.
Thank you, John. That's pretty much, we've run out of time now. So I suppose it's Friday night, and you're probably going to be getting ready to go out clubbing or something. So I'd better let you go. But thank you for your time on a Friday night.
Yes, you must think I'm a daft punk.
No,
Clubbing.
So thank you, and see you again soon sometime, I hope. So
Pleasure.
that's
Thanks
it.
very much.
No, you're
Take
welcome.
care.
You too. Well, that's it for this evening. So before I go, I just want to remind you, here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of you, our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you. You know that our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 per month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Our need to reach our £30,000 target to pay our bills is still pressing. However, the generosity of you has given us a little more time. We have now raised over £17,600, and we're able to continue making programmes for the next few weeks with that money. But we still need to raise the remaining £12,400 urgently. But as I said to John, I'll let you all get back to your weekends, and good night, and thank you for watching.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.